So what happens when a friendly warship sinks right in your backyard and you do nothing? Today we're diving into a source that looks at a pretty dramatic incident in the Indian Ocean, an incident that, it claims, signals a huge and controversial shift in India's entire foreign policy. Let's get right into it.
Okay, just put yourself in this position for a second. A warship from a friendly nation, one you were just doing military exercises with, gets attacked and sunk, right there in your sphere of influence. The source we're looking at today says this isn't just a hypothetical. It claims this actually happened, and India's response, or rather its lack of a response, raises some really big questions. All right, first up, let's talk about the incident that kicked off this whole debate. We're about to see how a friendly naval visit allegedly turned into a deadly attack in just a few weeks.
And the timeline here is just wow. It's incredibly fast. On February 17th, the source shows us the Iranian warship Iris Dina getting a warm welcome from the Indian Navy. They even used the hashtag Bridges of Friendship. Then, boom. Just over 2 weeks later, on March 4th, that very same ship is sunk by what the source claims was a U.S. torpedo. And then, that same afternoon, the source points to a supposed tweet from the BJP's official account that said, simply, "Not our business."
And what was the human cost of this attack, according to the video? A devastating loss of 87 Iranian sailors.
And this right here, this is the absolute core of the source's accusation. Alleged inaction. It highlights this quote, supposedly from Iran's ambassador to India, who claimed that while Sri Lanka raced to the rescue, India did absolutely nothing. Not even, as the quote alleges, a simple message to say they were sorry. This claim is really the foundation for everything we're about to unpack.
Now, the source argues this incident didn't just happen out of the blue. To really get why it's so significant, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the much wider conflict that was allegedly raging between the US and Iran at the time.
Yeah, the video paints a scene of a full-blown escalating war. It claims the US had bombed over 2,000 targets in Iran, and in return, Iran had hit back at nearly 30 US bases. On top of that, Iran's ally Hezbollah had jumped into the fight, and the death toll was already over 1,000.
And then, Iran allegedly made a move with massive global consequences. The source claims it shut down the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical economic choke points on the entire planet. And this number really shows you why that matters so much. According to the source, a staggering 20% of all the oil the entire world uses passes through that one narrow strait. You shut that down, and you've got an instant global economic crisis on your hands.
Okay, so now we get to the main argument of the source material. It's not just that a crisis happened. The argument is that these events show a complete 180-degree reversal of India's foreign policy, something it has held for decades.
To make its case, the source lays out this timeline, and it is pretty critical. It points out that on February 25th, Prime Minister Modi visits Israel. Literally 48 hours after he leaves, a joint U.S.-Israel attack on Iran is launched. And in the aftermath, the source claims that while the Prime Minister condemned Iran for retaliating, he was totally silent on the initial attacks.
This slide really captures the whole before and after picture the source is trying to paint. It contrasts what it calls India's historic policy of strategic autonomy, where it wasn't afraid to speak out, even against allies like the USSR, with what it sees as the present, being silent on US actions and basically picking a side.
And to really hammer this point home, the source brings up this specific example from the past. It claims that back in 2003, during the Iraq War, Prime Minister Vajpayee flat-out refused a U.S. request for troops and then went on to publicly condemn the invasion, showing India's independent stance.
So, all of this leads to the central, very challenging question that the source poses. If a friendly ship can be sunk in these waters without any kind of response, can India legitimately still call itself the guardian of the Indian Ocean?
Okay, so you might be thinking, this is all big geopolitical stuff. Why should I care? Well, the source argues that this supposed policy shift has direct, very real consequences that hit you right in the wallet.
And the reason comes down to one word: oil. The source highlights that India gets 55% of its oil from the Middle East. Now, with the Strait of Hormuz closed and the whole region in chaos, that supply is suddenly in serious jeopardy.
And to make things even more stressful, the source points to what it says is conflicting information about India's emergency oil reserves. I mean, look at the claims on this chart. One report in February supposedly said there was a 74-day supply, but a more recent government statement apparently dropped that number to just 25 days. That's a huge difference.
And this is a moment in the video that's presented as being, well,
pretty humiliating. It cites a U.S. statement that apparently gave India permission to buy Russian oil for 30 days. The source frames this not as a choice India made, but as something it had to get American approval for.
So what's the direct impact on you? This source connects all this geopolitical drama to a 60 rupiah price hike for LPG gas cylinders, arguing that these big foreign policy decisions are directly hitting people's household budgets.
All right, so the final part of the video tries to answer the biggest question of all. Why? Why would this massive shift in policy actually happen?
I mean, this is the central puzzle, right? It's the thing the source tries to solve. Abandoning a carefully protected, decades-long policy of neutrality. That doesn't just happen for no reason. There has to be a powerful explanation. Now, we have to be really clear here. The source moves into some very speculative territory, reporting on claims that it says come from opposition leaders. This is presented as speculation, not established fact. The allegation is that a U.S. corruption case involving a major Indian industrialist is being used as leverage or even blackmail by the American government. Ultimately, the video's conclusion isn't that this was just one bad incident. It frames the whole situation as the final stage of a long-term decline, what it calls a slow-motion crash of a once proud and independent foreign policy.
And that leaves us with the final, thought-provoking question this analysis poses. Are all the events described by the source just a temporary storm, a reaction to a crazy crisis? Or are we seeing a permanent, fundamental shift in the geopolitical weather for India?